Updates on the domestic terrorists. Drama in the House speakership race. A major UN agency will stop operating in Gaza. This and more on Dangerous Waters. This is the Dangerous Waters podcast, where we dive deep into dangerous waters. I'm your host, Alex, and in today's episode, we have a lot to talk about, especially with these updates on the domestic terrorist attacks that happened on New Year's. The first terrorist attack was perpetrated by a man named Shamsuddin Jabbar, 42 years old, from Texas, and he rammed a truck into a crowd of New Year's Eve celebrators, opened fire, and killed around 15 of them as of now. And just yesterday, a journalist was able to visit his home, in which they found a bomb-making station, a Quran open to a chilling passage about martyrdom, among other things such as electronics and whatnot. But I think this is really fascinating stuff, because how is it possible that the FBI allows a journalist to just visit a crime scene in this fashion before the investigations? And usually you don't see that happen. Now, I'm an advocate for transparency to the utmost extent, and I think that it is in principle a good thing that people are allowed to see what's going on. However, I feel the circumstances behind this are somewhat suspect, considering that the FBI doesn't allow this type of stuff to happen in other places, in other crime scenes. They allowed it for some reason on this one, a massive terrorist attack, and this New York Post reporter was just able to enter the premises without a problem. Clearly, this was done with the consent and with the approval of the FBI. They wanted to show something here. They wanted to let the public know that this was what maybe they wanted to see, or it could just be the reality. I don't know. See, this is the problem here, because when you combine these lack of transparency actions coming from the FBI, among other things, with this specific action, it makes it seem like there's some kind of agenda behind the scenes that they want to keep certain things concealed, especially when it comes to, say, Thomas Matthew Crooks, the shooter during the Trump rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. How come we don't know anything about him? If the FBI is so invested in transparency and making sure people know what's going on, he is of the utmost priority, but that's not how it works, apparently. Now, moving on to the next terrorist attack, this time perpetrated by active duty Special Forces member Matthew Livelsberger. There are some interesting circumstances behind this attack. So for one, the Cybertruck was not him. He rented it on the app called Turo, which is a drive-sharing Uber/Airbnb type application. The same application as the one rented by Jabbar for the previous terrorist attack. But going beyond that, another fascinating circumstance between the two attacks is, for one, the New Orleans shooter, Jabbar, recently had a divorce with his wife, whereas this time, Matthew Livelsberger's girlfriend recently broke up with him. They even have a 6-month-old baby, apparently. So once again, you see those coincidences lining up. Then what makes it even more fascinating is they potentially worked in Fort Bragg, now called Fort Liberty, a U.S. Army base, at the same time. Investigators also found Afghanistan to be another possible location in which these two figures were at the same time, although they do not have any specifics as to whether they knew each other as of now. But considering the selective transparency that's going on here, it's really hard to say what is real, what is not. Even if the FBI does confirm certain things, do not take it as an absolute truth. Always scrutinize it. Always put your own perspective into things. This is unfortunately the operating environment that we are in today. It's just not easy to find the real truth, and that's just unfortunately a byproduct of the type of practices that are being enforced in these federal agencies. Now, for our next topic, we have more speakership drama in the House of Representatives. This is something that's been recurring for a while, starting from the budget continuing resolution bill in Congress, which was somehow passed by Mike Johnson, and I will say I was incredibly surprised when it passed so quickly. I thought there would have to be at least some kind of government shutdown in the process, but he did it, and this really goes to show his level of leadership in the House. You don't see that often, especially considering how slim the GOP majority is. And now we are having round 2 of this drama. this time electing the next Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson obviously up for the running, being the preferred candidate among the Republicans. However, he can only have one GOP representative defect from his vote. Otherwise, they will have to go into a whole mess of meetings upon meetings and votes until some person manages to obtain that speakership position. However, this is not going to look good for the Republicans if they cannot unify among Mike Johnson. Mike Johnson obviously had to concede in some way to the Democrats to get the bill passed at all, but certain Republicans now are saying we cannot have this type of meeting across the aisle. This is not okay for our agenda. They say that Trump has a mandate of change and that America wants only full Republican ideals to be pushed through Congress, and the government will shut down if it's necessary to make that happen. However, this is a very short-sighted view and something that the Republicans fall short on all the time. They are unable to properly unify. The Democrats are incredibly good at this. They unify whenever is necessary, and they will make sure to completely halt any Republican agendas, no matter what it is, as much as they can. However, on the Republican side, what we're seeing is these people who are saying, oh no, we cannot have this level of normalcy. We cannot have these compromises, these agreements with the Democrats. We have to go full force, full throttle on our agenda. And that means maybe even taking out Mike Johnson. But when you take out a speaker like Mike Johnson, who is going to be put in place? Who's the next person in line? There's no one else at this point who's capable of coming to the gavel and being able to push out these mandates. You have to concede to the Democrats at this point in time. With such a slim majority in Congress, there's no room for mistakes. If you mess this up and Mike Johnson no longer starts running for speaker, what's going to happen? Potentially Hakeem Jeffries of the Democrats will end up being the speaker. Now, if you have a Democratic Speaker of the House and you have a Republican majority in the House, that is just going to be complete turmoil. It's going to cause gridlock like we've never seen before. Nothing will get done. Nothing from the Democratic side nor the Republican side will be pushed through. It is just going to be a disaster. So let's hope it doesn't happen. Let's hope that we can get some level of unity among the Republicans for this next term. Let's get into the next topic, this one coming from the United Nations, or more specifically, the United Nations Reliefs and Works Agency, or UNRWA, which is the largest humanitarian group providing aid to Gaza and potentially having to cease their operations in Gaza because of new Israeli legislation coming into effect. These new laws, passed by the Israeli parliament in October, will effectively not allow UNRWA to operate anymore in the West Bank or Gaza after January. So starting February, they will no longer be able to provide aid to these territories. And no matter what, it's a really sad situation that this is happening, but it's not so black and white. 12 members of UNRWA actually participated in the October 7th massacre on Israel, while other UNRWA members are deeply integrated with Hamas, and as a result, you see that they are pushing Hamas narratives. They are also allowing Hamas to stage missiles right next to their facilities or underground from their facilities, which makes the humanitarian crisis far more difficult than it should be. And no matter what, just being able to survive as a humanitarian aid agency in Gaza requires approval of Hamas, as Hamas effectively controlled the entire region. However, nowadays things are starting to change. Hamas's power is diminishing incredibly rapidly, but without UNRWA or other humanitarian aid agencies, it's likely that a lot of these Palestinians in the Gaza Strip will be suffering even further. So I really hope that something can be resolved. I hope that a hostage deal can be worked out before January 20th and that we can get some level of normalcy back. Right now, Israel is in a far upper hand in negotiations. However, Hamas is still holding out. They still want certain terms that are favorable to them, even though they are not in the position to ask for them, especially considering Trump coming into office on January 20th, holding a very hardline stance against Hamas. We'll see what happens. For our next topic, also from Israel, a very fascinating military raid happening on an Iranian complex. Let's talk about it. So essentially the context of this raid was in 2017, Iran decided to build a massive military complex in the Syrian mountainside, around 70 to 130 meters underground, highly impenetrable by most modern missile systems. And the base was going to be used by Iran to manufacture missiles to transport into neighboring regions such as Hezbollah in Lebanon. Certain missiles were already produced and rocket engines were also manufactured in the site. However, it was not fully operational yet. On September 8th of 2024, while Assad was still in power in Syria, the Israelis decided to launch a massive military raid on the complex, which was over 124 miles or 200 kilometers away from the Israeli border, guarded by Syrian and Russian air defense systems. 100 elite Special Forces commandos entered the complex via multiple helicopters. 30 guards were killed in the process of entering the facility. However, the facility itself was empty. The Israelis then attached remote bombs to the manufacturing equipment for the missiles, including mixers for creating solid rocket fuel for long-range missiles, and they took valuable documents from the base. After they left, they exploded the explosives and were able to exfil from the location within around 2 hours. Not a single person who was involved in the operation was injured or killed. This really goes to show the level of complexity and power that the Israelis have in the region, in the Middle East. They are able to pull off insane heists of this caliber, which you pretty much only see in action movies, but they're able to do it in real life. And it cements their legacy as not a group of people you want to mess with. Let's get into rapid fire news. From the New York Times, FCC's net neutrality rules struck down by federal appeals court. From NPR, 2 dead and several injured in Southern California plane crash. And from Reuters, U.S. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas will not be referred to the Justice Department over ethics concerns. With that being said, thank you all for listening to this episode of Dangerous Waters. If you enjoyed, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share with your friends. And as always, I will see you all in the next one.